The river Tigris, said to have watered the biblical Garden of Eden and helped in giving birth to civilization itself, is slowly dying.
Human activity and climate change have choked the flow of the mighty Tigris flowing through Iraq.
History of the Tigris River. It is a difficult task to reach the source of the Tigris. Where a dirt road ends, a small path leads over the shoulder of a jagged mountain whose peaks are gnawed like fingernails. The path becomes a goat track, treacherously narrow, winding around the hillside until it is halted by a tumble of springs. These form a torrential stream that disappears into a vast arched tunnel. When the nascent river emerges 1.5 kilometers later, it is tamed by whatever happened deep inside the cave. The ancient Assyrians believed this to be a place where the physical and spiritual worlds collide. 3,000 years ago, their armies traveled upstream to offer sacrifices. A relief of Tiglath-Pileser, king of Assyria, from 1114 to 1076 BCE, still stands at the mouth of the tunnel. Time has dulled his edges, but he remains upright and regal, pointing out across his empire. The source of the Tigris lies in present-day Turkey, where it flows southeast out of the Taurus Mountains. It skims a pinched corner of northeast Syria and then passes through the cities of Mosul, Tikrit, and Samarra on its way to Baghdad. In southern Iraq, the sprawling Mesopotamian marshes absorb the Tigris close to the confluence with its sister river, the Euphrates, and both flow together to the Persian Gulf. Around 8,000 years ago, hunter-gatherer ancestors settled in the great floodplain between these two rivers and developed agriculture and animal husbandry, leading many to call the area the cradle of civilization. From these early city-states like Eridu, and Uruk came the invention of the wheel and the written word. Codified legal systems, sailing boats, beer brewing, and love songs followed, among other inventions. Yet because of the decades of conflict that have plagued modern Iraq, the fact that the Tigris has guarded and shaped our shared human heritage is easily forgotten. For 10 weeks in 2021, a small team traveled roughly 2,000 kilometers by boat and overland from the Tigris source to where it empties into the Persian Gulf, a journey that likely hadn't been attempted since the Ottoman era. Their goal was to chart the river's historical importance and tell its story through the voices of those who live along its banks, while also investigating the threats to its future. A combination of geopolitical instability, poor water management, and climate change has led some to state that this once mighty river is dying. They also hoped that their journey would be a reminder of what emerged from the land and what could be collectively lost if the river that birthed civilization dried up. 80 kilometers from the Tigris's source in Igil, Turkey, the ramparts of an Assyrian castle have been modified by the Greeks, Armenians, Byzantines, Romans, and Ottomans, who all later settled along the river's banks. Further downstream in Diyarbakir, Turkey, where another fortress still stands that has existed in some incarnation since the Bronze Age, a similar layering has taken place. Today, the city is the de facto capital of Turkey's large Kurdish population, and in its labyrinthine alleyways, we rested in a basalt courtyard under the shade of a mulberry tree, transfixed by the haunting sounds echoing around the walls. There, a woman in a quilted beige jacket sat on a bench, her right hand cupped around her ear. Her name was Felaknaz Aslan, and for 30 minutes, her booming voice held them captive. She was a Dongbej, a Kurdish singing storyteller, whose ancestors have passed histories and folktales down through generations. Aslan's song was about a doomed love affair on the banks of the Tigris. Most Dongbej are men now, she said, but the practice was invented by women. It was a way of preserving identity and culture, and she explained that the Tigris is a common backdrop in these songs, recognized then as now as a central feature of life for Kurds in this region. Southeast of Diyarbakir, the Tigris etches a deep canyon through the Tur Abdin region of Turkey's Taurus Mountains. For centuries, This has been the heartland of the ancient Syriac Orthodox Church, whose origins date back to the dawn of Christianity. They climb to a remote 4th century monastery, Mor Evgen, which clings to the cliff as if suspended by faith alone. Inside the nave, plaster applied by some of the world's first Christians still stuck to the walls, and spidery Syriac script crawled around the walls in webs of prayer. The team members lit a candle in an alcove and bowed my head. It was another reminder of how the Tigris's fertile watershed allowed Judaism, Christianity, and Islam to flourish, and how these populations later took their goods, ideas, and beliefs to the far corners of the world. Matter of fact, Abraham, a spiritual model for each faith, is said to have come from there. They traveled by small boat whenever possible, though access to the Tigris is often tricky. In Turkey, navigating the river is difficult because of a series of highly contentious dam-building projects. In Syria, the Tigris is an international border. It wasn't until Mosul, a city carved in two by the river, that they were finally able to travel more freely. When ISIS, which stands for the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, occupied Mosul from 2014 to 2017, it forbade residents from using the Tigris, and Mosul's old city on the river's west bank became the group's last refuge. During the fighting, every bridge in Mosul spanning the river was destroyed, and some jihadists reportedly jumped into the Tigris in an attempt to escape during the final battle. Historically, the river might have been a connective force, but they saw how it became a point of conflict. Mosul's Arabic name, Al-Mawsil, means the linking point, likely because it was a crossroads of trade and a major hub along the Tigris between Diyarbakir and Basra. Established in the 7th century BCE, it's one of the oldest cities in the world, and during its pinnacle in the 12th century AD, it became ethnically and religiously diverse, alongside wielding great power and influence over the region. This confluence of cultures created a rich cultural space, and while much of the old city was destroyed by ISIS, the city's spirit lingers on. "People think we have nothing left," said Salman Kairala, a co-founder of the Tigris River Protectors Association and a companion on the journey. "But there's so much along the Tigris that survived it all. And more than that, we Iraqis always rebuild. We will never accept destruction." In Mosul, the toppled 12th century Great Mosque of Al-Nuri is being reconstructed with a huge endowment from UNESCO and the UAE. Just as striking is the community-led cultural revival. Opposite Al-Nuri is Beitna, meaning our home, where young Moslawi artists have created a multi-purpose museum, cafe, and venue space by refurbishing an old Ottoman home. "We don't want people to forget what happened here," Sarah Salam al-Dabag, one of the space's founders, said. "But we want to create employment opportunities and a place to support people with skills." The Tigris carried them on to Ashur, the first capital of the Assyrian Empire, where a 4,000-year-old ziggurat looms over the river. In the desert beyond were Nimrud, a later Assyrian capital, and the 2,000-year-old caravan city of Hatra. All three were damaged by ISIS, but heroic teams of local archaeologists are doing their best to protect the sites, even with the scant resources available. In a region that often makes international news for its war and hostility, one of the most lasting impressions of the journey was that of unadulterated hospitality. During Ramadan, tea was prepared by hosts who were themselves fasting. Many poor goats ended up atop a rice platter for them in lavish banquets. In the village of Kifray, the mayor told them how two young shepherds smuggled civilians across the Tigris from ISIS-held territory to safety at night, using only a tractor inner tube. The adventurers realized that no amount of recent violence could shatter residents' willingness to help strangers and their sense of generosity. Like strands of the braided river itself, the Tigris is woven throughout all of these stories, as a boundary between life and death, but also as the vehicle for great acts of kindness. They spent a Sunday with the Mandaeans, the smallest and perhaps oldest ethno-religious group in Iraq. The Mandaeans believe in regular baptisms as a source of spiritual nourishment and a way to cleanse sins. Baptisms must be performed in running water, and the Tigris, as one of the two rivers that allowed the faith to first flourish, is still home to many members of the community. They watched as, one by one, a priest led 8 women to the Tigris and gently submerged them, whispering prayers in Mandaic, an ancient Aramaic dialect for which they are the sole guardians. "The water here is the same as in the next universe," the priest's assistant told them. "The river that the Mandaeans and so many communities rely on is in danger." But from activists like Khairallah to the archaeologists of Ashur to the Moslawi artists reclaiming their culture, they found that the Tigris guardians are not willing to give up and are committed to rebuilding. When they asked Khairallah about the future of the river, he said simply, "Iraqis must always have hope. Whatever generations before us do, we can change." The cradle of civilization. While human civilization developed in many places around the world, it first emerged thousands of years ago in the ancient Middle East. We see the first cities, the first writing, and first technologies originating in Mesopotamia, says Kellyanne Diamond, a visiting assistant history professor at Villanova University, whose expertise includes ancient Near Eastern history and archaeology. Mesopotamia's name comes from the ancient Greek word for the land between the rivers. That's a reference to the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, the twin sources of water for a region that lies mostly within the borders of modern-day Iraq, but also includes parts of Syria, Turkey, and Iran. The presence of those rivers had a lot to do with why Mesopotamia developed complex societies and innovations such as writing, elaborate architecture, and government bureaucracies. The regular flooding along the Tigris and the Euphrates made the land around them especially fertile and ideal for growing crops for food. That made it a prime spot for the Neolithic Revolution, also called the Agricultural Revolution, which began to take place almost 12,000 years ago. That revolution transformed human life across the planet, but it was in Mesopotamia where this process began, Diamond explains. With people cultivating plants and domesticating animals, they were able to stay in one place and form permanent villages. Eventually, those small settlements grew into early cities, where a lot of the characteristics of civilization, such as concentrations of population, monumental architecture, communication, division of labor, and different social and economic classes, developed. However, the emergence and evolution of civilization in Mesopotamia also was influenced by other factors. In particular, changes in climate and the natural environment, which compelled the region's inhabitants to become more organized to cope. Civilization didn't develop in the same way throughout the region, according to Hervé Reculeo, an associate professor of Assyriology at the University of Chicago and an expert in the history of ancient Mesopotamia. As he explains, urban societies developed independently in Lower Mesopotamia, an area in what is now southern Iraq where the early civilization of Sumer was located, and Upper Mesopotamia, which includes northern Iraq and part of present-day western Syria. One factor that helped civilization to develop in both places was the climate of Mesopotamia, which 6,000 to 7,000 years ago was wetter than that part of the Middle East is today. The earliest cities of southern Mesopotamia developed on the margins of a great marsh that provided an abundance of natural resources for construction, such as reed, and food, such as wild game and fish, with water easily accessible for small-scale irrigation that could be organized at a local level and did not require the supervision of large-scale state structures, Reculeo writes. Additionally, he notes, the marsh provided a connection to sea routes on the Persian Gulf, which made it possible for people who lived in the south to eventually develop long-distance trade with other places. In Upper Mesopotamia, the rainfall was reliable enough that farmers didn't have to do much irrigation, according to Reculeo. They also had access to mountains and forests, where they could hunt for game and cut down trees for wood. Their areas also had land routes to places to the north beyond the mountains, where they could obtain materials such as obsidian, a type of rock that could be used in jewelry or for making cutting tools. According to the British Museum, early Mesopotamian farmers' main crops were barley and wheat. But they also created gardens shaded by date palms, where they cultivated a wide variety of crops including beans, peas, lentils, cucumbers, leeks, lettuce, and garlic, as well as fruit such as grapes, apples, melons, and figs. They also milked sheep, goats, and cows to make butter, and slaughtered them for meat. Eventually, the agricultural revolution in Mesopotamia led to what Diamond describes as the next big step in progress, the urban revolution. Roughly 5,000 to 6,000 years ago in Sumer, villages evolved into cities. One of the earliest and most prominent was Uruk, a walled community with 40,000 to 50,000 inhabitants. Others included Eridu, Bad Tibira, Sipar, and Shuruppak, according to the Ancient History Encyclopedia. The Sumerians developed what may have been the earliest system of writing, as well as sophisticated art, architecture, and complex government bureaucracies to supervise agriculture, commerce, and religious activity. Sumer also became a hotbed of innovation, as the Sumerians took inventions that other ancient peoples developed, from pottery to textile weaving, and figured out how to do them on an industrial scale. Meanwhile, Upper Mesopotamia developed its urban areas, such as Tepe-Gawra, where researchers have discovered brick temples with intricate recesses and pilasters, and found other evidence of a sophisticated culture. According to Reculo, climate shifts may have played a role in the development of Mesopotamian civilization. Roughly around 4000 BC, the climate slowly became drier and the rivers more unpredictable, he explains. The marsh retreated from Lower Mesopotamia, leaving behind settlements now surrounded by lands that needed to be irrigated, requiring added work and possibly greater coordination. Because they had to work harder and in a more organized fashion to survive, Mesopotamians gradually developed a more elaborate system of government. As Reculeo explains, the bureaucratic apparatus that appeared first to manage the goods and people of the temples in the marshland cities increasingly became the tools of a royal power that found its justification in the support of the gods, but also in its ability to get things done. History of the Mitanni Empire. The kingdom of Mitanni, known to the people of the land and the Assyrians as Hanigalbat and to the Egyptians as Naharin and Mitanni, once stretched from present-day northern Iraq down through Syria and into Turkey, and was among the greatest nations of its time, though today it is largely forgotten. Few records of the people themselves exist, but correspondence between kings of Mitanni and those of Assyria and Egypt, the Amarna letters, as well as the world's oldest horse training manual, and a treaty between the Mitanni and Hittites, give evidence of a prosperous nation which thrived between 1500 and 1240 BCE. In the year 1350 BCE, Mitanni was powerful enough to be included in the Great Powers Club, along with Egypt, the Kingdom of the Hatti, Babylonia, and Assyria. Beginning in the 14th century BCE, however, Assyrian incursions weakened the Mitanni kingdom, as the Assyrian king Ashur-uballit, 1365 to 1330 BCE, annexed significant territories. Disputes of succession among Mitanni royalty added to the kingdom's difficulties, and this lack of unity made Mitanni easy prey for the Hittites under their king Suppiluliuma I, 1344-1322 BCE, who deported large segments of the population and replaced them with Hittites. The Assyrian king Adad-nirari I, 1307 to 1275 BCE, took the region and again deported segments of the population, replacing them with Assyrian subjects. His son and successor, Shalmaneser I, completed the conquest of Mitanni in 1250 BCE, and his son, Tukulti-Ninurta I, 1244 to 1208 BCE, defeated the Hittites at the Battle of Nerea, 1245 BCE, eliminating them as a power in the region and obliterating the now greatly reduced kingdom of Mitanni, which then became part of the Assyrian Empire. The Mitanni kingdom ruled over the northern Euphrates Tigris region between 1475 BCE and 1275 BCE. The early people of the region have been variously identified as migratory Indo-Iranians or Indo-Aryans, and they have even been associated with the Semitic Hyksos, but their ethnicity continues to be debated. Scholars have attempted to identify them with one or another group based on the deities' names invoked in a treaty with the Hittites, but both Indo-Aryans and Indo-Iranians, once part of the same migratory band from Central Asia, venerated gods such as Indra, Mithra, and Varuna, among others. It is thought the ruling class was warriors known as Marianu, which gave the kingdom its name Mitanni when it was translated by the Egyptians as Naharin and Mitanni. The Assyrians knew the kingdom as Hanigalbat, also given as Kanigalbat, Hani-Rabat, and the Hittites referred to the people as the Huri, and their territory as the land of the Huri or Huri, and the land of the Hurrians, and so most modern-day scholars agree they were Hurrians. They used the language of the local people, which was at that time a non-Indo-Iranian language, Hurrian. The capital of Mitanni was Washukani, located on the headwaters of the river Habur, a tributary of the Euphrates. The name Washukani is similar to the Kurdish word Bashkani, Bash meaning good, and Kani meaning well or source, and so is translated as source of good, but also as source of wealth. Some scholars have claimed that the ancient city of Saqqan was built on the site of Washukani, and that its ruins may be located under the mound of Tel el-Fakariya near Gozan in Syria. Since there are few written records from the people themselves, however, any discussion of the kingdom of Mitanni eventually involves considerable speculation. What the kings of the people did and what other nations they interacted with is known, but nothing of the people's daily lives and religious beliefs. It is clear, however, that they were a considerable power in the Near East beginning in 1500 BCE. The kingdom. At its height, the Mitanni kingdom controlled trade routes down the Habur to Mari and up the Euphrates to Carchemish. They also controlled the upper Tigris and its headwaters at Nineveh. Their allies included Kizuwatna in southeastern Anatolia, Mukish, which stretched between Ugarit and Katna west of the Orontes to the sea, and the Nia, which controlled the east bank of the Orontes, from Alalak down through Aleppo, Ebla, and Hama to Katna and Kadesh in modern-day Syria. To the east, the Mitanni had good relations with the Hurrian-speaking Kassites, whose territory corresponds to present-day Kurdistan. The lands of the Mitanni in northern Syria bordered eastern Anatolia to its west and extended east as far as Nudzi, present-day Kirkuk, Iraq, and the river Tigris in the east. In the south, it extended from Aleppo across to Mari on the Euphrates to the east. The entire region was fertile and allowed for agriculture without artificial irrigation. Herds of cattle, sheep, horses, and goats were raised, and the Mitanni were famed horsemen and charioteers. It is recorded that they were the innovators who spearheaded the development of the light war chariot, with wheels that used spokes rather than solid wood wheels, such as those used by the Sumerians, so that the chariots were faster and easier to maneuver. Excavations of the Hittite archives of Hattusa, near present-day Bogazkali, Turkey, found the oldest surviving horse training manual in the world. The work was written in 1345 BCE on 4 tablets and contains 1080 lines by a Mitanni horse trainer named Kikuli, beginning with the words, "Thus speaks Kikuli, master horse trainer of the land of Mitanni," and exhaustively describes the proper methods of training horses. Kings of Mitanni. Little is known of the early kings of Mitanni, owing to the later destruction of the culture by the Assyrians, but the names of the early rulers are known through their correspondence with other countries. In the 16th century BCE, the most prominent kings seem to have been Kurta, his son Shutarna I, and Baratarna, also given as Parshatatar. King Shaushtatar, RC 1430 BCE, extended the boundaries of Mitanni through the conquest of Alalak Nutsi, Assur, and Kizzuwatna. Egypt, under Thutmose III, 1479 to 1425 BCE, defeated the Mitanni at Aleppo after a long period of contention over control of the region of Syria. The Mitanni king Artatama I reigned during the time of the Egyptian pharaoh Amenhotep II, 1425 to 1400 BCE, and Thutmose IV, 1400 to 1390 BCE, but little is known of him other than attempts at forming treaties with Egypt through marriages. His son, Shutarna II, arranged the marriage of his daughter, Kilu-Hepa, with Amenhotep III, 1391 to 1353 BCE, strengthening relations and helping Mitanni to consolidate power and secure its borders. Under Shutarna II, Mitanni attained its height of power and prestige and was listed among the so-called Great Powers Club, also known as the Club of the Great Powers. This is a modern-day designation for the strongest nations of the region, including Egypt, Babylonia, and the Kingdom of the Hatti, also known as Hittites, of Anatolia, who interacted with each other through trade and alliances. Treaties and trade agreements have survived from this era and later periods, but nothing more substantial to give a clear picture of how Mitanni operated as a political and cultural force in the region. Other civilizations are well documented, but how, and often when, Mitanni interacted with them is far from clear. Scholar Mark van der Meerup comments, "One of the best documented periods of the Mitanni kings is that of the reign of Shutarna II and his son Tushratta, only because of the correspondence known as the Amarna letters, and even this is hardly complete. King Tushratta and the coming of the Hittites. The daughter of King Tushratta, Princess Taduhepa, also known as Tadukipa, was arranged in marriage to Amenhotep III as part of a treaty that further balanced power between the two nations. Some scholars have identified Taduhepa with the famous Egyptian queen Nefertiti, 1370 to 1336 BCE, wife of Amenhotep III's son, Akhenaten, 1353 to 1336 BCE, or with Akhenaten's lesser wife, Kia, but these claims are generally dismissed by scholars. Tushratta sent a large dowry with his daughter, which included the statue of the patron deity of Washukani, the goddess of fertility, Sauska. Amenhotep III was ill at this time, and Sauska, who also presided over healing, was sent to alleviate whatever ailed him, but also, as a love goddess, to bless the marriage and strengthen the union. A list of the gifts is included in correspondence between the two kings and includes gold, lavishly ornamented horse saddles and camel litters, jewelry, and expensive clothing. This treaty was put to the test twice. First, when Tushratta wrote to Amenhotep III afterward that he had not received as much gold from Egypt as part of the marriage transaction as expected, and then when Tushratta's authority was challenged by a coup in his home city. The treaty would not survive this second test, which involved a power struggle in Washukani between Tushratta and a relative, possibly his brother, known as Artatama II. Egypt backed Tushratta in this conflict, while the Hittite king Suppiluliuma I, 1344 to 1322 BCE, backed Artatama II. The Hittites, hoping to break the Mitanni hold on trade routes, seem to have brokered a deal with Artatama II to stage a coup, but it appears that Tushratta had the support of his nobles and did have the strength of Egypt behind him at first. Tushratta seemed poised to succeed when Egypt, fearing the growing power of the Hittites, withdrew its support. Suppiluliuma I, tired of diplomacy and now free to do as he pleased without fear of Egyptian reprisal, led his forces on Washukani and sacked it. Tushratta was assassinated by his son, perhaps to save the city. Following this conquest, Mitanni was ruled for a time by the Hittites through puppet kings who advanced their agenda. The Assyrian conquest of Mitanni. Suppiluliuma I divided the former kingdom into two provinces with their capitals at Aleppo and Carchemish. The remainder of the region kept some degree of autonomy, though still a vassal state, and was referenced by the Hittites as Hanigalbat. At some point, the region fell under the yoke of the Assyrian Empire. Exactly when is not clear, but possibly during the reign of the Hittite king Mursili II, 1321 to 1295 BCE, and before the reign of Tudalia IV and the Battle of Nerea in 1245 BCE, which marks the beginning of the decline of the Hittite Empire. The Assyrian king Adad-nirari I left inscriptions telling of how an upstart Hittite king Shatuara I challenged his might. And so Adad-nirari I marched on Mitanni, crushed their forces in battle, and carried Shatuara I back to Ashur in chains, where he was forced to swear an oath of allegiance to the Assyrian ruler. While still an autonomous state, the kingdom now owed tribute and allegiance to Assyria and was no longer considered equal to the other powers of the region. Mitanni was further reduced during the reign of Adad-nirari's son, Shalmaneser I, 1270s to 1240s BCE, when King Shatuara II of Mitanni rebelled against Assyria with the aid of a nomadic tribe known as the Alamu around 1250 BCE. Shatuara's forces were well organized, fully armed, and had occupied all the mountain passes and waterholes to effectively cut off the Assyrian army's water supply and severely hamper their attempts at foraging. Even so, hungry and thirsty, Shalmaneser's army won a crushing victory. He claims in the records to have slain 14,400 men, and the survivors were blinded and carried away. His inscriptions mention the conquest of 9 fortified temples. 180 Hurrian cities were turned into rubble mounds, and Shalmaneser, slaughtered like sheep by the armies of the Hittites and the Ahlamu, his allies. The cities from Taidu, also known as Tate, to Eridu were captured, an area which today comprises northern Iraq through Syria, as well as all of the region of Mount Kashiyari, ranging down to and including the city of Eluhat, also known as Eluhut, which was located southeast in modern-day Turkey. A large part of the population of the conquered regions was sold into slavery and deported. Shalmaneser's son, Tukulti-Ninurta I, defeated the Hittites at Niraya in 1245, ending their control of the region and absorbing Mitanni fully into the Assyrian Empire. Afterward, Mitanni was forgotten as a political entity until archaeological excavation of the region in the modern day and the discovery of the Amarna letters in 1887. These letters, found at the site of El Amarna in Egypt, are the correspondence between Egyptian monarchs and others of the Great Powers Club, which, as noted, included Mitanni. The kingdom of Mitanni continues to pose problems for historians and archaeologists, however, owing to its destruction by the Assyrians. Even today, most scholars can provide only the briefest outline of the history of the kingdom and its culture based on the meager surviving documents and artifacts such as cylinder seals identified with the Mitanni. Although Cantor goes on to discuss artifacts associated with Mitanni, her description of the state itself, as with other scholars, provides little more than a glimpse of what Mitanni may have been. Even though more is claimed to be known of Mitanni today than in the past, scholars are still working with, essentially, the same basic information they had in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Until further artifacts or documentation are brought to light by archaeologists, this situation will remain unchanged, and persistent military conflict in the region continues to prevent efforts that could provide a clearer picture of the great kingdom that was Mitanni. Do you believe that these Bible prophecies are coming true? Tell us your thoughts in the comment section below. Thank you for watching. Kindly like and subscribe to our channel for more thrilling videos like this.